everyone, and welcome. My name is Caroline Colas. I'm the Senior Director of Health and Wellness at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan, and your host for today's Positive Psychology Hour, a partnership that we do with the Whole Being Institute. Today we're going to be discussing, should I be part of the Great Resignation, with Susan Peppercorn. Over the past months, millions of people have quit their jobs in what's become known as the Great Resignation, driven by many pandemic-related realizations about family time, remote work, commuting, passion projects, life and death. They've turned their backs on the 9-to-5 grind. This may be an opportune time to reimagine your best life. Should you stay or leave your job? How do you decide? What questions should you ask yourself before walking away? Today, we're going to learn some specific steps to navigate your worth and or make your best next career move. Whether you want to move up in your company or you're considering a pivot to something new, this session today will help you decide and prepare for the next step. A little bit about our speaker. Susan Peppercorn is an executive coach and career strategist who helps leaders navigate challenges with passion and compassion. Clients benefit from Susan's coaching through increased self-awareness, improved business performance, stronger working relationships, and greater well-being. She's a regular contributor to the Harvard Business Review and Fast Company, and is a sought-after workshop facilitator on career management, resilience, personal branding, and creativity. I welcome to the call Susan, who is going to be zooming in from her phone today. She's also very resilient. Let me have you unmute. There you go.
Thank you so much, Caroline. And I really appreciate this opportunity to speak to everyone today. This topic is so time relevant. As Caroline mentioned, millions and millions of people have left the workforce, not only in North America, but around the world. And so the question today that I am presenting to you is, should you be one of them? And I want to help you answer that question. So the agenda, and Phoebe's going to control the slides. Thank you, Phoebe. Is we're going to look at what's happening in the economy that's driving this. Why are people leaving? And some of the psychological and the emotional factors that are contributing to this great resignation or great reorganization, whatever you want to call it. Then we're going to look at questions to ask yourself and others, and other considerations before you take that leap, because this is not for everyone. We're going to look at options other than quitting, because there are options before you pull that plug. And then I'm going to take your questions. So without further ado, let's move on here. So a rising number of workers quit in the second half of 2021, hitting a record of 4.5 million in December alone. So almost 39 million people, that's an unbelievable number, quit their jobs in North America this year, with more than 24 million people since April. So the question is, and Phoebe, you can go to the next slide. Why are people leaving? And the bullets that you see here come largely from research that the Gallup organization has done. Some of you are familiar with Gallup and the work that they've done around strengths and the strengths finders. And Gallup has done a huge amount of work around employee engagement. So they have actually identified 12 factors around why people are leaving, or conversely, why people remain engaged at work. So I have looked at, or I've identified, the top 6 reasons that people are leaving. The first are no opportunities to grow. People feel that they've plateaued wherever they are in their organization, and they feel that there's no opportunity to move beyond where they are. They feel like they don't have the opportunity to learn, to develop new skills, and as a result, they may grow bored. So that's one reason. The second reason is a lack of purpose. They feel like they are not connected to the greater mission of the organization, assuming the organization has one. And if the organization has one, perhaps they've not communicated, or the manager of that individual has not communicated how the work that they do contributes to the larger mission of the organization. And research in psychology has shown that when people feel disconnected from the purpose of an organization, they disengage. So it's really incumbent upon managers and leadership in an organization to communicate how valuable the contribution is of every individual in an organization to the purpose and mission of that company or workplace. So that's reason number two. Reason number three is a disinterested culture. If an employee feels that management just doesn't care about them, they disengage. That's a very large reason why people are leaving now. And it's become increasingly so when people are working virtually. You know, when we're in an office and we have the opportunity to see our manager or manager's manager and have a conversation with them at lunch or, you know, over a coffee break, we have that opportunity to really engage and be part of a culture. But when we're remote or even hybrid, it takes much more of an effort for management to instill culturally how important employees are to them. And if that doesn't happen, and if that is not made a priority, if it's all about just performance and achieving goals, people will look elsewhere to find that. The fourth reason is need for flexibility. And I'm sure all of you have either experienced or have read about the fact that people want more flexibility. People who have children, and, you know, with schools open, sometimes they're closed. People need greater flexibility to take care of the people that they need to take care of, depending upon COVID situations. And so companies that are insistent that people come back to the workplace no matter what are going to lose out on talent. That's just a fact. The fifth reason that people are leaving is if they feel that their opinions are not heard and that they don't count. And so that's a factor. If people feel that their opinions are heard, they'll stay. But if they feel that they're not heard, then they're going to look elsewhere. And the last reason, which again, Gallup has done a huge amount of work in, is people leave when they feel that they don't have the opportunity to use their strengths. So if you want to comment in the chat box, which I can't see, unfortunately, but Caroline and Phoebe can, if you want to comment, if you've experienced any of these things and, you know, you'd like to weigh in, whether whether these factors have impacted you in any way, I'd love to hear from you, because I don't want this to simply be a one-way conversation. Or feel free to raise your hand and comment, because again, I would really love to hear your own experiences around this. So if there are any comments, somebody please.
Sure.
Oh,
There isn't any comments about that yet.
okay, so we can move on. Phoebe, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so what you see here is a slide by Amy Cuddy. Some of you may be familiar with Amy Cuddy, who had a TED Talk that went viral a number of years ago about body language and how body language, how through body language you can communicate confidence. And it was a very popular TED Talk. But what she communicates in this graphic is something that she described in, I believe it was a Washington Post article that she calls pandemic flux syndrome. And there are a few things that I want to point out here that are relevant today. So for those of you who don't know Amy Cuddy, she's a social psychologist, and she coined this term pandemic flux syndrome, which, as you'll note on the slide, is characterized by several conflicting feelings of hope and fear at the same time, which I believe most of us have experienced during this almost 2 years now that COVID has been part of our lives. And what she says is that our nervous systems are fatigued. And one of the things that may happen as a result of this is that we may have spikes that may cause us to want to drastically change something in our lives. So if you feel that suddenly you need to make a change in something, like your job, be aware that this may be pandemic flux syndrome actually in action, because our ability to make very clear-minded decisions has been impacted by COVID. And so we really need to take a step back, get some input from people in our network who we trust before we make some very bold and brash decisions about our lives. It could be, personal, but it also could be professional. Okay, Phoebe, you can go to the next. What we also know is that emotional contagion is a factor in whether people decide to leave their jobs. And Adam Grant, who many of you may be familiar with, he's a psychologist very well known from the University of Pennsylvania. He recently wrote about emotional contagion. And one of the things he said is that emotional contagion is a real thing. And in fact, negative emotional contagion is more of a factor than positive emotional contagion. So if we're around people that are negative, and let's say we're in a workplace where people are negative and they're like, I've got to get out of here, this place is terrible. We are subject to the contagion of the feelings of others. This is a real psychological phenomenon. And so what you see on this slide is that there is an effect, or there are effects of seeing peers leave your organization. And research shows that when the strongest performers leave, others in the organization start to reevaluate their relationship with the workplace. And when people quit, it triggers other people to think about quitting as well, especially if the person who's quit or who has been fired was a reliable colleague. And I can tell you that in my own situation, I was affiliated with a consulting firm for 13 years. And starting around June, people started to leave the organization. And by the end of December, myself included, 10 people had resigned. And I will say to you that emotional contagion was a factor, though it was not, certainly not the only factor in my decision, because I had built relationships with people that I had worked closely with over the years. And as they left, I felt that these relationships that had been very important to me and had really boosted me when I was there were gone. And so I questioned, did I still belong in this organization? So it was interesting how that the factor of seeing other people leave influenced my decision as well as the decision of others. So, if you notice in your own work situation other people leaving, especially strong performers or people that you have a relationship with, bear in mind that this can have an effect on you as well. Okay, let's move on. So I want to talk about 5 questions that you should ask yourself before you leave. So let's go to question number 1. The first question is, does my work enable me to use my strengths every day? So Gallup Strengths research shows that employees who use their strengths are 6 times more likely to be engaged in their job and 3 times as likely to report having an excellent quality of life. So not only are people happier in the work that they do, but this translates to feeling happier in life overall if people are using their strengths. So how do you know if you're using your strengths? Well, if you're energized by the work that you're doing and you feel, if you feel like you're in flow, you lose track of time and place, you're likely using your strengths. Because strengths are not only what you're good at, and I'm sure you've heard this from other speakers, but they also energize you. So that's a way to know if you're using your strengths. Okay, let's look at question number 2. Are my accomplishments recognized by my manager and company influencers? So Gallup's research also shows that recognition from managers to employees is one of the key 12 building blocks of healthy employees and healthy organizations. So I can tell you as a career coach that one of the reasons that I have found in my practice that people decide that they're going to leave where they're working is when they feel that they're not being recognized for what they accomplish. And that's a very hard thing when you feel like you're working hard at something and nobody notices. So that's a question to ask yourself. Are your accomplishments being recognized? The third question, do I know what is expected of me to move ahead? It's very interesting that oftentimes people are in jobs where they really don't know what's expected of them. And not only do they not know what's expected of them, but they also don't know what's expected of them to get to the next step. And so that's a real demotivator for people. If they, sometimes they'll ask their manager, well, what is it that I need to do to get to that next step? And they don't get clarity. And so that's ensuring that employees understand exactly what's expected of them, and how they contribute to the larger whole, and adding measurable results each quarter, and enabling employees to achieve those results in whatever way they see fit, empowers people to do their best work. But if they don't know how to do that, it's extremely demotivating. So that's a question to ask yourself. So question 4, am I learning and growing? So soon to be published research from the Boston Consulting Group found that a significant predictor of whether employees are engaged is whether their employers provide them with new opportunities to grow and advance. And their survey data shows that 68% of workers globally, and this is both blue-collar workers and white-collar workers, are willing to train and retrain to learn new skills. So that's a question to ask yourself. Are you learning and growing? Because people who aren't learning and growing get bored and they feel stagnant. And that's another reason that people are leaving. And the last question, do my company's values align with mine? So I often call values the bedrock on which we make decisions. Values are things that don't live in time and space. They're things that are kind of eternal and they ground us. And they can be things like generosity and loyalty and growth, for example. But only 23% of US employees strongly feel that they can apply their organization's values to their work every day. And what we know is that a value-driven culture is better prepared to navigate crises. So I'm going to pause here for a minute because Phoebe, I think, or Caroline, I think saw questions in the chat box.
Yes, we did have some great comments. Pam was saying, what a great list. Thank you. I plan to leave my job where I've been for 18 years, and so many of the things on the list are reasons why. And then Deirdre was saying people leaving can also be an opportunity to rise in your organization, be seen for talents and strengths and that were previously hidden when you take on something that somebody else was doing, right? And then Trizia said, I'm in a very lateral organization with limited growth opportunities. And Pam was asking, can you replay the 5 questions? Can we just go through those slides really quickly again? Would that be possible, Susan? And Phoebe, would you be able to do that for us? So we'll start for number 1.
Kind of mention something that Deirdre said, which I'm going to talk about reasons not to quit. And I think, Deirdre, in the comment that you made, there are reasons not to leave your organization. And I think in the comment that you made, some of those reasons may be in what I cover in reasons not to quit your job, or at least not yet. So if you go back to the questions, I will go through them again.
Sure, let's go one more time.
Right. Okay, so first question. Does my work enable me to use my strengths every day? And I want to just say something about this if I didn't make this point before. In any job, you cannot use your strengths every single hour of every single day. Okay, that's unreal. But if about, and some of you may be familiar with the book, Designing Your Life. And the authors of that book now have 4 books out. They have designing your work life and now designing your new work life. But they have an exercise where they ask you to track, what gives you energy during the day, and what is, what could you leave on the side? And so if you track during the day, just in a notebook, what energizes you, what doesn't energize you, that's going to tell you when you're using your strengths. So if you're using your strengths 50% of the time, that's great. And I'm going to talk about things that you can do in your current job called job crafting, that maybe you can increase the way in which you use your strengths, or the amount of time that you use your strengths, again, so that you don't have to leave necessarily. Okay, so that's number one. Okay, let's go to number two. Are my accomplishments recognized by my manager and my company influencers? So I think that's pretty straightforward. And there are some things I'm going to talk about that you can do to make sure that people do know what you've accomplished. Some managers are not good at giving recognition. Sometimes you have to promote yourself internally. Excuse me. But, there are managers who are not good at recognizing, promoting, and it's really disheartening when that's the case.
Susan, Lois had an interesting point. Not everyone has the luxury to like what they do. I lost my job because of COVID-19, and it wasn't a choice, but I got a new job in September, but had to leave it as it was misrepresented as part-time work, but they really wanted 40 hours of help. I think we live in a time where people are not going to accept what they might have before COVID. Is this true?
This is absolutely, this is absolutely true. And I think this is why so many people are leaving. I mean, if somebody represents something as being part-time and then they expect 40 hours, that's misrepresentation, point blank. So, you then have a choice. Now, I mean, and one of the things that I mentioned, everybody has a different financial situation. And one of the things that I talk about is you need to know what your financial situation is before you leave a job, because you need to have a minimum of 3 months income before you leave. Because finding another job, yes, the market is strong, but it could take 3 to 6 months to find a job, depending upon, a variety of factors. But people are leaving because they want to be treated better than they have been treated before. And that is a major factor. So, you have the right to ask questions before you accept a situation. So the third question that I mentioned is, do I know what is expected of me to move ahead? If you want to move up in an organization, then you have every right to ask, what do I need to do to move to the next step? What skills do I need to have? What behaviors do I need to exhibit? And you have every right to expect to have these questions answered. So that's question number 3. Question number 4 is, am I learning and growing? This is a big issue. If you've been with an organization for a long time, it's normal to feel like you've plateaued if you are not taking on new projects, new levels of responsibility, and you can get bored very quickly. So now part of that is your responsibility to step up and say, I'd like to take on some new responsibilities. I see this opportunity to do social media and no one's doing it, or, I have project management skills that I'd like to utilize. Can I do that? So sometimes you have to advocate for yourself, is what I'm saying. No one is necessarily going to come to you with these opportunities. You have to advocate for yourself. And then the fifth one was, do my company's values align with mine? And I strongly recommend doing a values assessment for yourself. There are many, many that you can take. Values in Action, the VIA, which you may be familiar with, or there are so many that are available on the internet. But prioritize your values. Sit down and think about what is really important to you, and what is it at work specifically that is important to you. And does the company that you're thinking about joining, do their values align with yours? Because if they don't, you're likely to not see a good fit. So those are the 5 questions. And if anybody, I'll share my email with this, but if anybody wants me to send you 5 questions, I'm happy to do that.
Susan, we had some great comments in the chat. Abby said, I think these are worthwhile questions to ask oneself about various situations other than work, one's marriage or partnership, for example, whether an area continues to be a good place to live, for example, yeah? And Deirdre says, every person has to develop agency. If it isn't there, I can't even imagine not knowing these things, right? And then Diana said, an excellent read on values is Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And Rachel had a very interesting comment, which you may or may not touch on, which is, this is probably beyond the scope of this lecture, but how can you evaluate whether or not these questions pertain to a job you're interviewing for? I mean, some people are leaving and then they're interviewing and they want to make sure that, wow, how do I know that this new situation is going to meet these five questions?
So let me talk to that point. My single recommendation to answer that question, Rachel, is to network with people that work for that company. And ask them for 10 minutes of their time to learn about the company that you're interested in. Here's the thing. Interviewing is like dating. So when you're interviewing, you are interviewing the company as much as they are interviewing you. And this means that the company representatives are going to be on their best behavior, because it's a date, as well as you being on yours. So you're not going to find out things that may not be so terrific about the company on an interview. And what I recommend when I work with people who are thinking about a transition or maybe in career transition is identify the companies that you're interested in, and then find people that work for those companies. Maybe you went to school with them. Maybe you had worked with them previously. Try to find somebody that you have something in common with and ask them for 10 minutes of their time. Tell them that you're not asking for a job, you're just asking for information, and ask them if they would spend 10 minutes with you talking to you about what they like working there, what they find challenging about working there, because that's when you're going to get the real information. That's when you're going to find out about, what's the culture really like. You're not going to find it. You're not going to find out on an interview. You're not going to find out from a recruiter, because a recruiter wants you to take a job. That's how they make money. You're only going to find out from people who work there or who have worked there in the past. You can also look on Glassdoor to see what people have written about the company. I also recommend looking at places that people have, like best places to work. There are publications that evaluate the best places to work. And that's a starting point. I know Business Week does that. I know I'm in Boston, so I know the Boston Globe does an annual survey of the best places to work. I'm sure in New York City, there are publications that do that as well. Employees rate their employers on, are these good places to work or not? So that's a starting point as well, to find out why people rate their employers highly or not. So, but networking is the best networking is the best way to find out what people really think about employers.
That's a wonderful suggestion. That's a really, I think, critical suggestion, and one we might not have thought of before, which is to network and to ask people that are, currently working there what the culture's like. Thank you, Susan.
Absolutely. So I want to talk about 5 reasons not to quit.
Oh, I just lost you for a second. Are you still there? Oh, Susan, we can't hear you.
Foreseen opportunities. I think Deirdre may have mentioned this. You're crushing your goals. You're not ready. And it's a great time to negotiate. So let me go through these. So you may have a sponsor in place. So a sponsor, what's a sponsor? A sponsor is someone who knows you and your work and is willing to vouch for you. They have power. This is an important point. They have power and clout and influence in your organization, and they'll speak up for you when it comes to a promotion or compensation. And so if you're fortunate enough to have a sponsor, it may be worthwhile to stay where you are, work hard, and let your sponsor know that you're committed to the organization and its success. Because during times of change, when turnover is happening, opportunities become available, and they'll likely put your name forward. So that's the first point. The second point is your company may have unforeseen opportunities. As people are leaving, more opportunities may become available. And so their departure may open these opportunities. And this is an opportunity, this creates situations where you can build relationships and be seen with fresh eyes by management. 3, you may be crushing your goals. You may be doing really well at achieving your goals. And if you're over delivering value to your team and your organization and earning a standout reputation for your efforts, why leave now? So your ability to demonstrate bottom line results and professional growth over a period of time is going to stand out to your current employer or to a new employer at some point in time. The 4th reason, you're not ready. Change is exhausting. Making a change has to be the right time for you. And you also have to take into consideration, if you're in a relationship, that not only does leaving a job impact you, it impacts others. So if people depend on you at home, you need to have a discussion with them before you shake things up. And lastly, this is a great time to negotiate. So for all the reasons that we talked about, and for others that I did not mention, employers do not want to lose talent at this time. You know, as Phoebe mentioned, I write for Harvard Business Review, and so I have interviewed human resources managers, and I can tell you that they are terrified about losing talent. They lay awake at night about what they can do to retain the top talent that they have. So if you're in a good situation, this is a time to advocate for yourself and to negotiate for a better title, for more responsibility, for more money. So these are 5 reasons why you should consider not quitting at this time. So let's look at some additional considerations. So there are some things that you need to have in place. I mentioned finances a few minutes ago, but there are some other things that are really important. And as I mentioned, you know, I work a lot with people who are thinking about making a transition. And one of the things that I have noticed when I work with people is that frequently they do not have an updated resume or LinkedIn profile. And not only that, they have not targeted a role. So if you're going to leave, you need to think before you do about what's the target I'm after. And once you've established that target or targets, you can have more than one. You need to get your branding materials, as I call them. That's your resume and your LinkedIn profile primarily. You need to get those things up to date and ready to go. Because that's going to take you a little bit of time. You don't want to step out the door and then say, oh, wow, I've got to get those things in place. Third, as we talked about, you need to have some financial resources. Now, if you've been laid off, you may be collecting unemployment or severance. But if you quit a job, you are not eligible for either of those things unless the circumstances are very specific. So you have to have at least 3 to 6 months of savings, because what are you going to live on? And what I have found is that, generally speaking, people underestimate how long it's going to take to find a new job. And the more senior you are in your role, the longer it's going to take. It can take up to a year if you're very senior in your role. And then lastly, what professional and emotional support do you have in place? I can tell you that looking for a job can be lonely. And what people have expressed to me when they've lost a job or leave a job is that one of the things that they miss the most is the schedule that they had and the relationships that they had with other people. So it's good to develop what I call a personal board of directors. Some people call it a kitchen cabinet, but just a few people, a board of advisors that you can lean on, go to call on for both professional and emotional support before you take that step.
We had a few comments in the chat.
Just one more thing that I want to talk about as alternatives to quitting. So I mentioned job crafting before. So I want to talk about a few things that you can do in your current situation before you decide that you're going to leave. I believe that many of you are familiar with the concept of job crafting. This is a concept that was developed in positive psychology research about 20 years ago. And what it basically means is taking proactive steps and actions to redesign what you do at work. And it could be changing tasks, relationships, tasks and or relationships based on your interests and your organization's needs. So I'll give you an example. Someone that I know who works in the biotech field does very detailed operational work. And a number of years ago, she was asked to reinvigorate a women's leadership network in the pharmaceutical company where she works. It wasn't part of her job description, but she decided to take this on because she saw this as an opportunity to build relationships with women across the organization that she didn't know, and also to build relationships with more senior women in the organization that she could bring in as speakers. And so she did. She took this on as a volunteer role and really found this to be very invigorating for her. And she did this for a number of years. So that was one way that she crafted her job. She actually loved the work that she did, but she was looking for a way to expand, her goal was to build relationships and meet other people across the organization. And so now she did not, so in her case, somebody came to her with this opportunity. But in job crafting, if you have an interest, we talked about strengths earlier, if you have an interest in something and it's not part of your job description, you can go to your manager and you can say, I notice that our group has a need for, someone strong with project management skills or social media skills. I'd like to take that on. Would that be okay? And maybe it requires that something that you currently do be offloaded to someone else. So it may be a negotiation that you have with your manager about offloading some current responsibilities, but it could be a way of you reinvigorating your interest in the current job that you have by crafting it into something new. So the second thing is about initiating a career development conversation with your manager. We saw one of the questions was about, do you know what you need to do to get to the next step? So maybe you want to talk to your manager about where you want to go and how to get there. So you can initiate that conversation if your manager doesn't. And I would also recommend that you don't do this at your annual review time, that you pick another time when you can, simply have this conversation about where you see yourself going, where you'd like to be going, and what your manager can do to support your getting there. Maybe there's a course you'd like to take, and ask for your manager's agreement in helping you get there. The third is requesting, in this case, more flexibility. Maybe you want to work from home completely, or have more of a hybrid arrangement, or maybe you want to work off hours. One of the human resources managers that I was talking to mentioned to me that lab workers that typically would be in the lab, 9 to 5, one of the accommodations that they made for lab workers in a biotech was letting them come in on weekends or whenever it was most convenient for them to run their experiments so that they could take care of family needs and have the flexibility in order to do that. Fourth, which we talked about earlier, is negotiate for a promotion or a raise. Maybe you deserve it, but you haven't asked for it. And then lastly, an alternative to quitting is to explore a new role in your organization. Go online in your employee portal and see what positions are posted. Perhaps there's some new roles that you would like to explore. And so these are some alternatives to quitting. So I see some comments coming in, so why don't I pause here and let's talk about them.
Great. Lori said, maybe there are participants like me in the audience. I work part-time at a spa and have new skills that I want to add to my private practice. How can I juice up my side hustle? And Deirdre commented that looking for employment when unemployed can feel humiliating for people, as though they're losing employment value, viability, and that's because too much emphasis is being placed on us and our role as a worker and not as a human being. And Donna said, I find that nonprofits do not want to lose talent, but they are not being proactive enough with salary increases, title changes, and perks to keep good people. They're willing to give them when someone comes in with a great new job offer, but that is too late to show someone who's already been working there that they are valued. And Deirdre said another comment, which is every interviewer asks, what would you like to know? And she's had very honest responses from interviewers in response to her questions, expectation, rising, etc. Though she doesn't ask about culture, since perceptions can be very biased and can't be quantified. And here's another one. I know there was a lot of comments here. I'm about to retire after nearly 40 years in my industry, third company. I'm okay with getting off this treadmill and perhaps something will come my way on my terms. And okay if it doesn't. Nice to not be desperate or starving.
So there was a comment about looking
for work when you're unemployed.
Yes. So I just want to make a comment about that. When you're looking these days, I think the stigma about being unemployed is not what it used to be. And I really want to emphasize that, because with the number of people who've left voluntarily, I think there's, a lot more grace being given to people who are unemployed. And, even people who've left voluntarily can say, I've taken time off to really think about what I want to do. And, to really, take this time to explore, the right options for me. And I think that's perfectly fair to say that. So I would not feel devalued in any way by the fact, by the fact that you're looking. And as far as culture, that's why I go back to networking. You're not going to get an answer. If you ask on an interview, the answer you're likely to get is, oh, this is a great culture. We have a great culture.
And do you know of the 4 million people who have quit their jobs? Are these very high-paying jobs, or people barely eking out working 3 low-paying jobs?
It's across the board. A lot of the people who've left have left to take new jobs. So they're not only people who've left, period, they've actually left to take new employment, but it's all across the board.
Susan, for the first time in my life, I saw on Indeed reviews about people that had worked at the company where I was interviewing. I've never seen that before.
Wow.
And they were all terrible.
Well, that's a warning. Yeah. Phoebe, I think, we can just move to that quickly because I want to be cognizant of your schedules. So I just, want just to summarize here. So I think, it's important to understand the drivers that we talked about, in terms of why people are leaving. Ask yourself the 5 critical questions. And again, I'm happy to send them to anyone that would like them. Tap your network for input. Explore internal possibilities. And consider your options. Okay, Phoebe, you can go on. Okay, I think you can go on from here because I just want to. Okay, so I just want to mention to everyone that's still on, I'm going to start a new course the end of February. It's going to be called Future Proof Your Career. So for anyone that's interested, so anyone who's interested in the 5 questions that I mentioned today, you can email me. My email is on this slide, speppercorn316@gmail.com. Also, I don't have my website on here, but it's susanpeppercorn.com. And I have a number of free resources on my website. It's on they're on the resources page that you can download. There's a branding ebook, 25 steps to making a career transition. That's another free ebook that you can download. So feel free to do that. And if you're interested in learning about this course, just send me an email. So I want to thank you, everyone who was on here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Susan. This was really fantastic. And I just had a quick question for you. Around the, you said that unemployment, people that are unemployed are being looked at differently. How about people that are older? It seems to me like, especially with flex time and part-time work, that those of us that are skilled, and we've had several people in the chat mention this, and older, there might be opportunities here as well. Are you finding that to be true?
So here's my answer to that. Ageism still exists. Okay, long live ageism. And my recommendation when it comes to ageism is to use your network. Don't apply online, because the average recruiter is going to be somewhere between 28 and 32. And so I have a few recommendations when it comes to age. Number 1, don't put every job that you've ever had on your resume. There's no rule that says you need to do that. So, stop at 15 years because employers are going to be most interested in your last 10 years of employment anyway. So don't go back to the 1980s, if you have a long career history. Secondly, use your network and don't apply online, because when a recruiter, sees somebody who's, in their, late 50s or 60s, there will be age bias. But if you are introduced into a company through somebody who works there, you're much more likely to get a hearing. And third, make sure your skills are up to date. Because sometimes the reason that people face age bias, it's not sometimes the reason that people are counted out is because their skills are not up to date. So Deirdre, it's not nepotism. It's just an introduction.
That introduction counts for a lot. We all know it. It's true.
A huge amount.
You don't ask your jackass friend who works in the company to introduce you. You ask your very competent friend who works in the company to make that introduction.
Absolutely.
And it really does. And I'm not saying nepotism in all the negative sense of it, but getting that introduction by someone who is connected positively is worth its weight in gold.
I
That's
couldn't
all I'm
agree
saying.
more. I couldn't agree more.
And maybe I should come up with a better word than nepotism because it has such horrible negative connotations. But we know that that works. It always has. It works. Yes,
Yes.
you have to have the skill base to land it and nail it, but that intro gets you in the door so that somebody looks at your skill base to begin with and
That's
not
right.
just the other stuff.
Beautifully
That's right.
said. That's right. Wow. Well, this is a hot topic, Susan, and I think it's on everybody's mind. And I really especially appreciated what you were talking about with Amy Covey, that we might be, and if you could just summarize that a little bit as we close, that, some of the things that we might be feeling, that hope and fear at the same time, might kind of cloud our judgment. And I wonder
Yes.
if that goes into the negativity bias a little bit, where we're thinking, oh my goodness, it's better on the other side, right? And we need
Yes.
to take a step back and say, wait a second. And I love that you gave us those, like, do you have your resume and your LinkedIn profile up to date? Do you have savings? Do you have an idea of what you want, so that we're not just reacting to the pandemic stress, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, this has been an incredible hour. And talk about resilience. I just want to brag on Susan for a moment. We got on and she couldn't get on because there was something happening with Zoom. And it was like, okay, pivot. She sent her PowerPoint to PB and she got on her phone and we had the AV person in here and we were and your calmness under sort of that pressure was a great example of what we need to be, which is, I think, in this job market, agile.
Got to make it work, right?
Right. So thank you so much. We look forward to, if anybody's interested in the course. Now, would you be able to share your slide deck so that we can put that with the recording so other people might be able to contact you? Totally up to you, versus having everybody email you individually. Your choice. You can let me know later. But
Okay.
I do, or some version of it. That would be great. Everyone, thank you so much. Please take care. Be safe, be well, keep coming back. Sandy is going to be here. She was my TA in the WBI Positive Psychology certification course. And she's going to be talking about health. And that'll be on Thursday. And until then, we will see you next time. Take care. Thanks, Phoebe. Thanks, everyone. Bye now.